All right, my name is Tommy Santora. I serve as the president of the New Orleans support group here and also the communications chair for the MGFA Communications Committee. And I am honored to moderate our next session, MG in the Workplace. Very important discussion that we're going to have on MG in the workplace. As a patient, how do you tell your employers, the people you work with, your colleagues about having MG? And exactly when do you tell them? Do you tell them in the interview process? Do you tell them as soon as you get your job? Do you tell them 6 months later when maybe you have symptoms that are affecting your job? It's a very complicated situation. So to address that, I brought a labor and employment attorney, Brooke Duncan, who is sitting to my immediate right. I used to work with Brooke at Adams and Reese law firm here in New Orleans. And I also brought Charlene Watkins, who is sitting to his immediate right. Charlene is with WWL-TV, Channel 4, in the Human Resources Department. And then next to her is Ronnie Adams. Ronnie Adams is a lead associate at Booz, Allen Hamilton. And then to her right is Scott Taylor. And Scott Taylor is with Audi Manufacturing, and he is also with Enthusiast Auto. He is starting his own business in addition to working with Audi. So you have some very impressive people up here who are going to talk about MG in the workplace. And to kick it off, what we're going to do is just have them describe the kind of work they do on a daily basis, and then we'll get into questions that address MG in the workplace issues. So Scott, we'll start with you, if you just want to address what you do in your job at Audi.
Hello, I'm Scott Taylor. I'm a master technician for Audi. I've worked for Audi for since 2004. And my daily tasks are just doing general maintenance, service, diagnostic repairs, just whatever the customer complains about pretty much.
Hi everyone, I am Ronnie. I currently am a lead associate at Booz Allen Hamilton. Booz Allen, you guys might not know what it is, or you might now that Edwin Snowden made a mark, but that is where Booz Allen is. I am cybersecurity consultant and primarily working with the government, our primary clients. My current role requires a lot of travel, about 1 week per month, sometimes up to 2 weeks per month. So very interesting when it comes to MG, but essentially what I do is manage a group of IT security analysts and doing security testing at different state agencies across the United States.
Hello, I'm Charlene Watkins. I'm the assistant to the president and general manager of WWL-TV in New Orleans, and my daily tasks are making sure that all appointments are taken care of, travel, reports, supplies for the whole house. So basically I do just about everything administrative in that area. The general manager and the department heads depend on me a lot, and it's very stressful, but I enjoy what I do, and people depend on me every day.
I'm Brooke Duncan. I'm an employment lawyer for employers. I represent the uptrodden, as I like to say, as opposed to the downtrodden. But what I do, having been an employer before I became a lawyer, is I try to keep my clients out of trouble and frankly, more importantly, teach them how to do the right thing by their employees, because it is the right thing, but also happily helps them stay out of trouble as well. So what I'm hoping to touch on today for you all is how to have dialogue with employers about conditions which may be disabilities as defined in the law, and for which you may want to explore accommodations from employers, or for those of you who are advocates for employees, for patients with MG, those who are seeking employment and may need to at some point have that discussion about accommodation for the condition of MG. Thank you.
All right, so how we're going to do this is we're going to ask 5 questions to our MG patients in the workplace and get their opinions on each of the questions, and then we're going to ask Brooke a series of questions about how he looks at it from an attorney's angle, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A and discussion. So that's kind of how this seminar will roll. So the first question I have for our panelists is, when did you tell your employer that you had MG, and how did you describe it? 2 very critical issues, so I'm interested in both. And Scott, we'll start with you and just work our way down for each of the questions.
With my current employer, I told them during the interview process.
Okay.
And they really didn't ask much about it. They just wanted to have a note from my doctor saying that I was okay to work.
Okay.
And that's it.
How did you describe it?
I didn't really.
Okay.
I told
You
them
just-
I had
you
it.
just mentioned it.
Yeah, I mentioned it. They didn't ask. I didn't tell.
Okay. Okay, Ronnie?
So for me, it was a little different because I've been with Booz Allen now for almost 10 years, and I did not have MG the whole time I was at Booz Allen. So never came up in the interview because I couldn't even probably pronounce myasthenia at that point in time. I remember when I started getting symptoms, I kept to myself, and I would say that's one of the biggest mistakes I made in all of, having this disease. But I lived with it, I would make excuses and I would say, I'm sick today, I have this cold, I lost my voice, it was always this nasally thing, but I never ever, admitted to myself really, let alone my employer or any of my colleagues that something was really wrong. So that brings me, I guess, to the next point where I was in a very fortunate position, and I bet you a lot of you guys are probably very similar. So I was in and out of the doctors, I don't know, once every 3-4 days at least that a week, probably more like 2 or 3 times a week. So I was in and out of the office, and obviously people started seeing, what's going on? What is she doing? Why is she here one day? Why is she not the next? I spoke with, at the time, my principal, which is essentially, a very high-level person at Booz when I was coming in, fresh as really just like a consultant level. And just wanted to let him know, I'm trying my best, but this is why I'm in and out of the office. It's not like I'm blowing off work. There's something going on. So he closed the door and he sat me down. And at first I was like, oh no, did I make a mistake? And he said, I'm going through getting diagnosed right now with multiple sclerosis. And it was just, amazing, awesome story because he knew exactly what I did, I think both of us just sat in there and started crying because we had the same stories and we had the same, it was Lyme disease last week, this week it's, MS, the next week it's gonna be some other disease we've never heard of. And it was just awesome to have that support and that kind of backbone. So I never would have known that if I didn't go in and tell him something was going on. And if you guys are in similar situations, find someone you trust because for all you know, it's a very similar situation and they're there to help you. So when I described it, again, very unique for me because he was going through something very similar. But we kind of talked it out together, and I didn't tell anybody else at that point in time what was really going on. I kept it between him and myself, and we were kind of our own little support group in treating the whole diagnosis process. As time went on, of course, it got much easier to talk to other people. You just bring in the people, that know what's going on and that you can talk to. Nobody out of everybody that works at Booz Allen, all my clients, no one's ever looked at me weird or no one's ever really treated me differently once they knew what was going on. It's just a matter of being open about it, and you don't have to tell everybody. Just tell the people you need to, and, if you don't feel like telling some colleague that sits across from you or that sits a few rows down, no need to. It's not, it's your personal business, but when you go in, it's amazing how much support is out there and how supportive people do want to be to you.
Well, my story started in November of 2005. I started working at WWL because I lost the job that I had at a hospital. The hospital was closed due to Hurricane Katrina, so I got a job at WWL. It was the lady that I worked with before at the hospital. She was in human resources, so I started working in November of 2005, and then I started experiencing all these kind of symptoms. And then in December, I was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis. So I explained it to her, and by her being human resources, she would be the first line person that I would speak with, and she understood. And I explained to her the things that I needed to do, see neurologists and have all these testing. So she told me to do whatever I need to do, to take care of my health. So I worked until May of the next year, and I had to have a thymectomy that June. So I hadn't been working there 6 months to accrue sick time or anything like that, but they were gracious enough to let me take leave for 3 months. I had the thymectomy. I went back in September, and I've been working ever since. They've been very accommodating as far as my work area. Make sure I have comfortable chairs and things that I could reach easily, you know, to help me to do my job. So I've been very fortunate.
Okay. Yeah,
Let me start out by saying I don't have MG, so I cannot say that I'm walking in anyone's shoes here who does. But let me also make this observation that the theme I'm hearing from my three co-panelists is dialogue with their employers or in some cases potential employers, and that is key. And it's also, I think, good to hear and to emphasize the experience that these folks have had insofar as finding that in their instances at least, their employers, the representatives of the companies for whom they work have been helpful, have been sympathetic. And I think I would say that also is consistent with my experience in working with employers, that most companies, most employers, most people who are supervising, hiring in HR positions want to do the right thing, but they don't always know what the right thing is, particularly for a condition which I will admit I had never heard of before Tommy asked me to participate in this panel. And so that dialogue and looking for that opportunity to create dialogue in the hiring process, or if you're a current employee later on, as we heard from two of our folks here, is so important. It also happens to be a step which carries out the legal obligation of the employer, which is to have an interactive process with employees or applicants, as far as that goes, about whether under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and a reasonable accommodation can be provided for an employee who has a medical condition which may be a disability in the way the law is defined. And I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent about the definition, but a disability in this context means any medical condition that interferes with work, and obviously MG has that potential. So there's always going to be a feeling of there being some risk in bringing up early on, particularly in the interview process, or even prior to that, as you're looking at job descriptions online or wherever you happen to get the job leads. And then, of course, later on in the interview process, when do I bring this up? And I think my encouragement to folks would be to do two things. First of all, as early as possible, to understand the essential functions of a job. And that is a bit of a legal phrase, but it's one that's important, I think, for your purposes, because it will help you understand what accommodations may be reasonable as you get into dialogue later on. And of course, that whole process also depends on your own condition. I am beginning to understand superficially at best right now that MG can be severe or not so severe, and therefore the accommodations may be somewhat greater or somewhat less for various folks. There is risk in having that kind of open dialogue, of course. People are going to feel a natural disinclination to have that interactive process with employers or prospective employers. But I would encourage it because, again, you should assume, I think, until proven otherwise, that your employer, prospective employer, does want to do the right thing. If they don't, and they have over the magic number of 15 employees, then there's a potential for an ADA violation anyway. I don't particularly want to emphasize that because I think it's more helpful to have that interactive kind of process. If you end up having a supervisor who has the same or a similar condition, well, then of course you've kind of, if you can put it like this, hit the jackpot, because you've got somebody who can empathize and sympathize with the need. But I do want to repeat, I think now many years into the ADA, it's a law that's 25 years old, most employers want to do the right thing, and so they'll have that dialogue. Certainly if they come to me and ask, what should we do? My first piece of advice is always listen to the employee or the applicant. What does that person want? Ask them, what do you need? From a legal perspective, you don't necessarily give that applicant or employee everything that person may want, but by having the dialogue, you really can't go wrong, because hopefully you reach an understanding so that the employee's needs are addressed as well as the employer's.
So each of you answered about the reaction of your boss. I think you touched on that. But I guess for this question, what I'm looking for is any interesting stories when you told your coworkers. How did they react? I'll just start off with a personal anecdote. I went into a law firm, Adams and Reese, and didn't tell them right away. You know, I just kind of tried to do my job without telling them. And I think that's something, you know, everybody in this room has tried to do because it's an awkward conversation to have. You want to be able to look like you do the job. But I wasn't feeling well, and one day I just show up with a pirate patch. So you can only imagine the kind of comments you get if you show up in a pirate patch and, you know, nobody knows that anything is wrong with you. So it's a very delicate, you know, topic to address. So to Brooke's point, I mean, tell them early, tell them often, tell the people you work with, get that message out there early, and then when you show up with the pirate patch, it's not unexpected. They know something's happening with you, you know, with your MG. So any interesting stories about how maybe your coworkers that you work with on a daily basis that you're close to, how did they react, you know, when you told them or that you had a symptom going on at the time? Scott?
I've told a few coworkers. They had a few questions. They weren't, you know, of course, they'd never heard of it. I don't think they really understand it still, but they see, you know, I told them, you know, started off with just double vision and muscle weakness and falling down sometimes and stuff like that. And I guess they kind of understood it, but not going to sit there and go through everything. But they seem to understand and very helpful. If there's anything I need help with, someone will come help me, or gotta pick up something heavy or something like that.
Okay, good. So a positive reaction then?
Oh, yes.
Good. Okay.
I guess as I mentioned earlier, all of my reactions have been awesomely positive when it comes to me telling people. There's a few I guess I would bring up. I know one was when I was trying to hide it, not doing anything, you know, kind of locking myself in my office, sounding nasally when I was leading conference calls, you know, the whole thing. And one coworker who knew what was going on, still very close to me, he doesn't work at Booz anymore. He called a doctor because he knew my mom was up in Connecticut and I was in Virginia, and he knew how stubborn I was, and he left the office, we left together, and he drove me to the doctor and kind of was my voice and spoke, because he's like, I know you're just sitting there and I know you're saying everything's fine. But he actually took all these notes about my different symptoms, and he drove me to the doctor, sat there with the whole appointment, you know, for me. And again, he's a close friend now, but at the time he was a guy that worked across the hall. So it's really, really positive reactions there. I think the other one is, it's funny because I have a scar, so I think that's what comes naturally when people ask. So right now I meet a lot of new clients because I'm always traveling, and you can tell some of them don't really want to ask because they get nervous and they're like, I'm just going to let that be. But then you'll get these bold people, you know, who come right out and say what happened, you know, and they all assume it's like a heart condition of some sort. And then the second you say it's not, they're like, oh, I thought you were sick. And I'm like, no, I am. This is worse than the heart because it's still there. But I feel like that's also a very common reaction, and sometimes a scary one, is you don't look sick. A lot of us don't look sick, and you never know when something's going to go wrong. So I think explaining it and trying to, you know, get that across is don't be afraid to say, I look great and I look healthy, but that doesn't mean, you know, something's not going to change in a few minutes or whatever the case might be. And then the other thing is, everybody that I have told, you can tell that they've taken the time to go and Google what myasthenia gravis is, because the next morning they're like reading Wikipedia, you know, oh, well, this is what you have, or that's what you have. So again, it's really positive. Don't tell everybody, because then you become, you know, somebody who has MG. Whereas I feel like if you just tell the people you need to make sure you're okay, it's great. I mean, it's empowering. And I've had people with my travel, there's always at least one person who I'm with on the road that knows I have it and is there to help if something goes wrong. And I think that's very important, to make sure, at least at every point in time, there's someone there who's got your back and able to cover for you if and when needed.
Initially, when I found out I had an MG and I went to my human resources director, I printed some literature because I myself was still trying to figure out what it was. I printed some literature to give to them so they could sort of kind of understand what I was going through. But then since we started the walk and the fundraising, and I'm like in charge of that, so basically everybody in the whole station knows that I have MG, because when I ask for money, I tell them that I have MG and, you know, how long I've had it, and I also print some of the information about the disease itself. So many of the people at the station now know exactly what MG is, and they're pretty empathetic with me now. And they say, "Oh, Charlene, I didn't know you had MG," even though they don't know what it is. But they're, you know, most sympathetic, and they know that, you know, if something happens to me, they know what it's all about. But I really don't look like I'm sick at work, because when people found out, they were like, "Oh, you don't look like you have MG." But that's the way it is. But it's very good that the people I work with know, because I've had some instances where I needed their help. I had one time where I had a choking spell, and I had to get somebody to help me. So it's good to let people know who you work with in case you're in need of any kind of medical help.
And let me build exactly on that. If you're in an environment where you have a good HR department, good HR director, you do want to go involve those folks on a proactive basis. When Tommy showed up wearing a patch, we didn't think anything about it. We thought it was just Tommy, but
That's a good point.
I don't even remember your patch, to tell you the truth. But you know, there are going to be there may be instances where you come to work and you either have brought something that you need, like a CPAP machine, or or a wheelchair, or you're going to need some accommodation like that. So insofar as making it easier for your workplace to accommodate those kinds of needs, or just to understand why it is you're wearing a patch, or otherwise acting differently from your coworkers, it is best to involve HR. Now, what if you don't have a good HR department? That happens. Or you're in a very small environment where there simply isn't one, then you just have to kind of, you know, hope that you are lucky enough to have a good, empathetic, sympathetic supervisor, or even a coworker somewhere within that working environment who can help explain your situation to others. Again, I find it interesting that for everyone here, there's a certain at the panel, I mean, there was a certain inevitability to their coworkers finding out that there was an issue. I need help lifting, there's a visible scar, whatever. Again, I think that I would be accurate in speaking for HR folks and managers in general, that they'd rather know that there's something that possibly does need accommodating, like a breathing emergency if that were to occur. I think most employers, most supervisors would want to know. So again, if you're anxious about having that conversation, that's a perfectly natural reaction. But from an employer perspective, I know I'd rather that conversation take place than not, and then an emergency present itself and your workplace, your cohorts at work don't know what to do or what's wrong with you.
Okay, question number 3. In what ways does MG affect your daily work activities? And Scott, I think you touched on this. I mean, you work in the labor world, so you're constantly, you know, trying to keep up with your coworkers and trying to do, you know, jobs that have deadlines. I work on a computer. You know, I have deadlines, but, you know, I'm not always, you know, it's totally different working in the labor force, which is exactly why I wanted you on this panel. So speak a little bit about, you know, working in that kind of environment, keeping up with everybody else, and how MG affects you being able to do that.
Usually I don't have a problem keeping up. Just every once in a while I do have bad days where I'll just have to pace myself, or just take it easy, like towards the end of the day. Luckily the shop is air conditioned, so the heat doesn't affect me. For the most part, I think I pretty much walk circles around most of the other guys anyway.
Good, that's good.
And so usually don't have any issues keeping up. There has been times when when I was, before I even knew what was wrong, I was just like had to stop and just close my eyes and couldn't see, and you know, just my arms just weak, trying to pick up tires or something. It's just really rough, but once we got it figured out, got treated, got much better.
For me, I guess, and what I do, primarily one of the largest things was my voice. And as part of my job, I lead tons of conference calls that bore everybody, but all I do is talk. So I think that was difficult for a while because it was this nasally sounding where I couldn't even get a word out. And here I have, countless people on the phone that are relying on me. So I think that was one of the big impacts that I initially had. Because I do a lot of traveling, it's obviously just, getting tired sometimes because travel for anybody, is tiring and exhausting. So I think there's ways that I've learned to basically get the best schedule out of my travel trips. They're generally a Monday to Friday. And I've learned, Monday, don't do anything else other than check in, you order room service or pick something up and just get my rest back. If it means I sleep for 10 hours, that's what it means. And again, because there's always somebody on the team that knows, everybody knows, don't bother Ronnie on a Monday night and force her to come out to the bar, force her to go get dinner. I mean, it's Monday night is my catch-up day. I sleep, and then I'm good for the week. And then when I get home on Friday, I have my, weekend to get back up. The other thing before I pass it on that I know I personally still struggle with to this day is, again, we don't look sick. And when I go on my work visits and, manage these technical assessments, a lot of people are, trying to better themselves, I guess, if you will, and exercising. So if you're just going from floor 2 to floor 3 or even floor, 2 to 4, they're always like, oh, let's take the stairs. You look like you're fine. Let's just walk up the stairs versus walk into the elevator. And it drives me insane because I'm terrified of stairs. For whatever reason, I know it's fine. But it's this whole, you just meet a person and they look at you and they just assume the stairs are perfectly normal. So that's one thing that I think I still struggle with. And even though I think it is mentally in my head, because I could climb stairs all day and be fine, it's terrifying for me. So there are still a lot of challenges that you definitely have to overcome. And with me, again, it's always having somebody else there. Because to be honest, I'm really shy and I don't like to say, I would never tell someone, oh, I'm not going to take the stairs because I have this autoimmune disease. But I have this buddy at work that if that comes up, he'll say, no, I got to take the elevator. So it's kind of, you work it out on the background so you don't have to be the one that's making those decisions or in, weird, awkward situations. But if you have at least that one person, he'll say it all day long, can't do the stairs, I have this, or my ankle hurts or something, and off we go to the elevator. So there's always workarounds.
My biggest challenge is I talk all day too, like Ronnie, and I'm a morning person. In the morning I'm just, go get it. But the afternoon I'm kind of like, slowing down. My voice is raspy, tired. My eyes, like right now, my eyes are just not really focusing well. So I just kind of like take the quiet time in the afternoon at work. I try to do all my big stuff in the mornings, my reports or what have you. But the afternoon I try to do maybe like my filing, computer work, something where I don't have to really deal with people. So that's my main thing. And sometimes, in meetings and stuff like that, I may get embarrassed because my voice is not like I think it should be. But then I just, I don't worry about it. I don't let it get the best of me. So, but that's my biggest challenge, getting tired in the afternoon at work, in stressful situations. But other than that, I'm good.
All right, so question number 4. So did you request to your employer any accommodations? And if so, what was provided?
I did not request any
Okay.
accommodations.
Because you're doing circles around these other guys?
Pretty much.
Pretty much? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Scott's awesome. He really is. So. Okay. Ronnie?
I never did anything formally, but honestly, just here right now, that's number one thing that I'm going to do when I get home. I do have a great company. Booz is great, and I'm sure they'll keep it, kind of to ourselves. What I do is I'm very fortunate, and I have a great supervisor. I do work from home and have the ability to work from home, and that was something that I kind of drew out with my old manager as part of the schedule. When I get my IVIG days, it's not like I need to tell anybody it's happening. It's just an automatic, calendar invite that goes out, and everybody knows I'm out of the office, don't have to request, don't have to say anything about it. It just is what it is. And then I think the other big thing is making sure at least your supervisors or people who might be looking for you at work, you have that flexibility where if I'm not feeling well, I don't have to call him and say, I'm not feeling great, I'm going to take today off. It's just, I take the afternoon off. And you've established that line of trust, and they know, you're going to get the work done and everything else. So I think having that upfront communication really, really helps, because then I don't have to stress out if I'm not doing well, or if I'm late to the office one day, late getting out of bed. It kind of naturally flows. So again, I haven't formally done anything with HR, but I do believe, going forward, I will, just to make sure that that's there as well. But if you tell the people you're working with, it makes a world of difference.
I haven't requested any special accommodations, but I'm always told anything I need, if I need to take off to go to doctor's appointments or what have you, or if I'm not feeling well, do I want to change my schedule or work flex time or do part-time, anything that I need, they would accommodate it for me. But I'm not one to abuse those type of situations. I'm pretty much into what I do at work. I'm not one that call in and those type of situations. So when I do call in, they know that I'm really sick, or I really need the time off. So they're very accommodating. I appreciate it too.
It's almost a question of whether or not these folks know that they have been requesting accommodations, and it sounds like in their cases, their employers have been granting those accommodations. This is where I get to demonstrate my legal acumen to you all. So the ADA does require that employers consider so-called reasonable accommodations by folks who have disabilities as defined by the ADA. And so what are those kinds of accommodations? They take a number of different forms. Equipment is one, or accommodation for equipment if you're bringing something from home. Providing a work table, a desk that will accommodate a wheelchair, that's an easy one. Time off is a very important one, and remember that if your employer is large enough, that employer will fall under the Fmla, the Family and Medical Leave Act, which kicks in at 50 employees. And if you qualify for FMLA leave, you can take it in blocks of time, or you can take it intermittently, as I think Ronnie is essentially describing, and taking days off. Even if you need time off that's unanticipated, FMLA leave can cover that. FMLA leave is 12 weeks of time a year on a rolling calendar year. Again, I won't try to get into all the details, but if you're unsure about FMLA, I'd be happy to tell anybody afterwards exactly what that entails. There's also leave available under the ADA itself. The EEOC takes position that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, time off from work can be a form of reasonable accommodation, and that's useful to know if your employer does not satisfy that 50 employee threshold, although I think all the employers up here will. I suppose your dealership, the Audi dealership does, but maybe not. But anyway, the other two certainly do. But under the ADA, which kicks in at 15 employees, you can request leave as a type of reasonable accommodation as well. Under both of those kinds of leave, you're entitled more or less to come back to the same job. It sounds like in the anecdotes we're hearing right now that people are coming back exactly to their job, and that's not a problem. That's the admirable way it should turn out. In times when long leave periods are taken, that may be a bit more difficult to pull off. But once again, I think you're seeing that interactive process, which in the ideal context does build trust between you and the employer, is really the desired path. And once again, it is also one that carries out the legal obligation of the employer. This is written purposely from the employer's perspective, but it also is, I think, helpful for you all to understand how an employer does look at the ADA accommodation prospect. If you are the patient or you're an advocate for a patient, it just helps to know what the workplace is going to be looking at. Just as employers are well advised to keep an open mind, so are patients, so are advocates for patients, and to consider all options, and remember that the employer's legal obligation is to consider what's reasonable. Reasonable is a matter of expense given the size of the workplace. Reasonable is a matter of how much is the workplace going to be turned upside down to make the accommodation that you may need. My very superficial knowledge about MG suggests to me that there should not be wholesale changes needed in a workplace. For most manifestations of MG, if heavy lifting is required, then perhaps another person can come along to help lift that tire. or if resting up is a requirement before meeting with the client, it sounds like that's often able to be accommodated, and on and on and on. I do want to repeat that FMLA is often an option overlooked by employees, but one that can be used. And understanding the difference between FMLA, let me just get into that a little bit. Under FMLA rules, when you do take time off under FMLA, you're entitled to come back to the same or a similar position. Under the ADA, you're entitled to come back to exactly the same position. So the smart individual would request leave under the ADA, which also, again, kicks in at 15 employees instead of 50. There's none of this, 2 doctor certifications. How many people here are familiar with FMLA? Most everybody. Okay. ADA is a lot simpler. There's no forms to fill out necessarily, none of that, and you are entitled to come back to the exact same position. At least that's the EEOC's position. But the best way to approach any kind of an accommodation dialogue is exactly as you've been hearing up here, and that is go in with the assumption that there's going to be a level of trust, a level of more than just willingness to help you, but an eagerness to help you. Remember that in the workplace, these are employers who hired you in the first place. And if they thought you were a good prospect when they hired you, we will think you're still a good prospect, and they're going to want to work with whatever medical condition it is that you present in order that they continue to enjoy the benefits of the qualities of work that you bring to their workplace.
All right, so number 5, what kind of tips or tricks could you provide to our audience? So maybe some pre-work things you do to prepare for your work day, things you do on breaks, lunch, etc. Any tips or tricks you could provide?
The biggest tip I have is just to get rest. A good night's sleep is going to make a world of difference in your day. And on my lunch break, I live fairly close to work, so I go home for lunch and get to relax for an hour.
Okay.
Just take it easy.
Definitely the big thing is the rest. I mean, you guys, we all know our limits, and we know when our body starts going and acting strange and when something's going to come on. So as hard as it is for me back then and still is today, I try to fight it, and I'm sure you guys probably all do the same. But when you're in work, I mean, you gotta know when that limit is, and you gotta take the break. If that means you stop talking for a little bit, if that means, you take 20 minutes out, 30 minutes out, I think we all know that's much better than waiting and then, going into crisis or having something else happen. For me, the other trick is, again, I know I've been saying this a lot, get a buddy, even if it's just one person at work, because then you don't necessarily even need to tell anybody you need this break. If you have one person that you trust that's working with you, I know there's been times, if it is a conference, just automatically moves over. It's nobody knows what's going on. It's just somebody else takes over, and it seems like it was a natural thing that meant to happen. So you don't need to tell the thousands, hundreds, or even 10 people if it's a small office you're working with, as long as you have one person, that you kind of go back and forth with as necessary. The other thing, which I don't do anymore because I'm not on Mestinon, but Scott kind of reminded me, is calendar invites. If you guys all have Outlook or some kind of system that's managing your appointments, put little alarms in there so you don't forget, because it is very easy to get caught up in meetings or easy to get caught up in other things. Don't let your Mestinon, go late. If you need to take it every 4 hours, if you need to take it every 6, put a little reminder in your Outlook that says it's time, and go take that medicine. Because if you let another hour go by, even a half an hour, I remember those days, it took forever to try to get back to that stable point. So I think it's important, use your work, capabilities or functions like Outlook to remind you so that you don't get caught up in real work or work.
I'm guilty of that, Ronnie. I had to take a pill just before I came up here because, I felt my eyes and my voice and everything. But I feel better now. But rest is important, and I'm guilty. I don't get enough rest. It's like I just can't shut my mind off. And my husband fuss at me all the time. If I get 5 to 6 hours a night, I'm good. But I really need to learn how to rest. I'm good at work, but like in the afternoons, I just kind of cruise along. But rest is important for all those who have MG. That's my big advice.
Good. When they asked me to come up with panelists for MG in the workplace, they said, okay, just come up with 4 people who are MG patients and they work and they have issues at employment and they could, describe what kind of things they do to get through the day. I wanted a dream team. And, Scott works at Audi and, keeps up he said it perfectly. He runs circles around these guys. He has MG, he doesn't let it affect him. He takes the proper rest, takes the proper precautions, and, succeeds really well at his job. And I wanted a labor force kind of person on this panel. Ronnie travels for Booz Allen Hamilton, government consulting firm, meeting with clients, interacting with them on a daily basis, working on major contracts. In her spare time, she's a national walk hero, trying to get MG awareness out there. So definitely wanted her on the panel. And then Charlene works in a high-paced media environment for, a local top television station, WWL-TV, Channel 4, and she pretty much said it. I'm going to say it for her. She is the acting CEO, to her CEO, and does all the administrative tasks. And then Brooke Duncan, who I used to work with at Adams and Reese, major labor and employment attorney, partner, works with, tremendous employers in the New Orleans area, part of a law firm that's covered in 16 states, over 300 attorneys, and really knows his stuff about, working with employers and try to be proactive about these kinds of accommodations and employers with disabilities. So I thank them for all being here.